Welcome to the Home Building Hub, your essential podcast guide to building your new home. Hosted by industry experts Colin Bischoff and Darren Brennan, this conversational podcast will help better educate you about all things new home building so you can avoid costly mistakes and enjoy your building experience to the fullest, no matter which home builder you choose.
Hey there, folks. Welcome to the Home Building Hub. You're with Colin and a more healthy and less sick co-host, Darren Brennan, today. So, Dazza, good to have you along and sounding a little bit more healthy. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, mate,
you good?
Back on track.
Yes? Good.
Loving it.
You scraped through last week pretty well, I must admit, though, all things considered. So, today, guys, we want to highlight and talk about one specific area opening up, I guess, a bit of an opportunity for those who can see it as a positive, Darren. Why irregular shaped blocks can be a great buy. And that's really what we want to cover today. So essentially what we will do is we'll explain what they are, what they mean, where the opportunities are for those of you who are interested in. And I think it's such an interesting topic because a lot of people just stick with the traditional stuff, Daz, which is that rectangle, So I think it's an area that takes a little bit to get your head around, but if you have the understanding that you could open up a side yard and a rear yard because you've got an irregular shaped block, then there's some actual benefits. And some people love the opportunity to buy a corner block for that reason. Some people love regular shaped lots for that reason because it gives you sort of two sections, two zones, and you can get your house design. I guess you could pick it accordingly with a side facing kitchen or living area, if that makes sense. So I know back in our day, Darren, there's a couple of houses that were probably the most popular. If you remember the old Sierra and Palisade back in
absolutely.
Back in those days, they had a side-facing sort of design that really opened up to that side yard as opposed to a backyard, which is quite powerful. So let's focus on highlighting in this episode. We'll highlight, educate around the benefits of a regular shaped block, and we'll discuss some of the things to look out for to avoid making one of the biggest mistakes that people can make. Okay, so for those, I guess, at the start of the process, looking at land and you're sort of considering what to do, where to go, and we understand and respect it's quite a daunting process because you're talking about land, you're talking about houses, talking about inclusions and all this stuff. So our first bit of advice is for all of you in that boat, jump back to the first 10, 20, 30 episodes of this podcast and you will see and learn everything you need to know about that part of the process. And I think that would be more beneficial for you to do that before you jump in and buy any block or any house. Once you do that, though, let's talk about the benefits of buying an irregular shaped block. So, Dazza, over to you.
Yeah, I think we want to obviously identify what we're talking about. We say irregular, but you mentioned corner blocks. I'm going to say a battle axe block, which is sort of one that has a narrow sort of front getting onto the block, but it's quite long and deep, heading sort of, left or right of that. I guess, initial entry onto the block. They can be, again, a little bit tricky. But, pizza-shaped blocks is often what they are, or they've got multiple boundaries. So rather than having just 4 boundaries, we're talking about often blocks. They may only have 3, but they could also have 7 or 8 because of just the nature of the shape of the block. And developers would obviously prefer to cut up regular blocks, but they're often left just because of the nature of the land and they've got to, work their way around corners and whatever else that they end up with these irregular shaped blocks. So they are something that's, in most stage releases, there's corners all the time, but there's also these other blocks. And even on corners, you can get tricky corners, Colin, where the crossover's to the rear, for example. So you don't have the crossover at the front. What would the short side of the block? It could be at the rear of the block. So again, you're then having to look at finding a design that now suits that actual block. And it's just working with your builder then to find a suitable outcome that's going to actually be able to work on that block. But I guess that the real key benefits on those are often you're going to get some real bang for your buck. So the price per square meter generally on these irregular blocks, corner lots, battle axe blocks, it's going to be better value, so you might get a bigger block for a little less money, which would be fantastic. And again, they're often open to negotiation, particularly in a market like right now, that there is a bit of land around. If you wanted to negotiate with the developer, I'd say a lot of developers would be pretty happy to have that conversation with you, and they might not 2, 3, 4, $5,000 off. It could be 10 or 20 grand off, depending on how many of them they've got and how ugly the block is in terms of that shape and what people's perception of that is. So, the big win out of it is certainly that you can buy it for a lot less. And once it's built and the house is on there, you really don't look at the shape of the block anymore. It just, the garden's growing and, you've landscaped it accordingly and it can look really, really good. I know I lived on a corner block at one stage that half of it was front yard and so the backyard didn't begin to halfway down the side of the lot. But what it meant was we had this really amazing front yard that addressed sort of the corner of this position that we were in, and we really loved it. It was a fantastic block, whereas others would have looked at that and thought, oh, gee, don't quite know what to do with that. And in our case, we had a side entrance, so we had our garage on the short side and a veranda around the front and a side entrance, and it really worked well. So, again, if you get the design of the home right, then you're in really good shape.
Another benefit I'd jump in and say, Daz, is yard space. So
Absolutely.
We've seen that. Obviously, I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but just diving a bit deeper into that, if you think about it, you've got open yard space like on the side. It gives you an opportunity to pop a shed around the back that may not have fit or may have stood out like a sore thumb on a normal regular block. This sort of gives you a chance to have sort of that two sections, the two zones. And for those who buy a block that's a little oddly shaped, it might be like you call the pizza-shaped one, Daz. It does open up towards the back, leaving you that extra room. You could put in, some people might have room for a pool, might have room for a spa, a bit more decking and outdoor area. And as I said, sheds out to, things like that. So I think that's the benefit. But I would say cautiously, make sure you've got the right design picked because that can make or break it for sure.
Absolutely. And I think it also allows you to sort of have a unique design of home depending on, often you'll get a standard home on there, but it might mean you've got to tweak the design. And I know I was actually working with one of the consultants who works with me this week on one of these corner lots with the rear garage. And the design, we had to move the garage in the front of the house to the back of the house, and where that garage area was, we put another lounge room, and we've added the garage to the back. The design come up really good. It addressed the street corner really well, and it's designed really well to suit the block now, and the customer is absolutely wrapped, and that's what you want to be looking at is how do you get a really nice design outcome with respect to that. And like I say, it can address both in this case, the two streets that it's on, but often it'll be addressing the 2 yards you've got, because you might have a side yard and a backyard that are quite spacious and able to be used. So in an ideal world, you want to address both of those and, for example, have a living area off the side and sort of door getting out there and also door getting out the back as well if there's yard there. So, it does give you some really good design options and allows you to become a little bit creative. And again, not every builder's going to let you do that, but find one that will, that's going to work with you around the design that's going to fit on there that'll really maximize the use of that lot.
Yeah, it's good.
So sorry, mate.
No, I was just going to say it's good because I think some people really want to have a design that's suitable to them rather than picking one off the shelf, so to speak. And I think that an irregular block is one of those things that can enable you and empower you to do that quite well. Yeah,
absolutely. I guess there are mistakes and traps too, Cole, so that's probably, one we should touch on as well. And, I guess with that, the main mistake people make is they see the price being so attractive, but they don't realise what they've actually got to do to get the floor plan to work on that block. So, and whether it's even possible. And again, you talk about the pizza shape where it's narrow at the front and wider at the back. But in reverse of that, if it's wider at the front and narrow at the back, it can become more difficult. Did I get that around the right way? I think I might have said the same thing twice, but you know what I mean. You've got one that's that's pointing at the front versus pointing at the back, and the pointing at the back one's often more difficult to work with. So, again, something like that can be difficult. The other one that we didn't have in our notes just to talk about, but I think it is important, is if it's quite snug on the block and the garage all of a sudden isn't parallel to the boundary, but it's touching the boundary on one corner of the garage, or it might be trying to mill off, you might not be able to get a permit to do that. So you may have to splay or make your wall of your garage off on an angle,
Yeah.
right? And in which case, not all builders will do that. And it's not easy to build because now your roof's a bit out of kilter, and can be done. Absolutely can be done, but it takes a little bit more work. And a lot of people say, no, we won't do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Again, just talk to your builder, find out what they're able to do. If you can, splay the boundary. Why not? Make your garage a little bit bigger. You can have a little workshop in the side of your garage in this angle bit. Works really well. And where I've seen it done, it can be fantastic.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we've done a couple of those ourselves. And so a splay for everyone is building on an angle as opposed to a straight line. And essentially a splay costs it can cost you a few grand, depending on the builder. Plus, you actually are very likely to need to upgrade your roof to colour bond because it can be cut to suit, right? As opposed to roof tiles. So yeah, keep in mind a little splay like that, bang, price goes up 5K pretty quickly. So, but yes, it's something to consider, and that's why we always say to you before you buy a block of land, you must get a floor plan confirmed. You must have an idea of what it is you're going to achieve on that block. So one of the mistakes in line with that, Daz, is assuming that all builders can help. So if you go and buy a block of land that's irregular, and then you just go out there assuming that all the builders have a plan that's going to suit, you might be in the wrong, the wrong mindset or thought there, because it's quite often the case that builders don't have a design and they will need to customize one. And as we know, not all builders are willing to do that. So please make sure that if you've got a block in mind, you go and lock in a few builders in terms of initial chats at least. Hey, yes, we've got a solution. We can do that for you, and get a couple of site plans done, a couple of floor plan, markups, however it looks. Give you the confidence that you can fit something that you actually want to live in and want to build on that block. Consultants should be able to help you with that, no stress. But that's one of the biggest mistakes we see on all shapes and sizes, Daz. People buying a block that does not fit the house they actually want to build.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the next mistake is ignoring the crossover location. And again, it's funny how many times these sort of things come up, Cole, and I can tell you I'm dealing with a customer at the moment who'd originally gone in and bought a house and land package off a different builder through the developer. So they'd found the house and land package at the developer, thought that's great. It's a triangle. It's literally got three sides, this block. But that original builder had thought that the crossover was in it was in the other location of what it actually is. So their house fitted when it was in that location, fitted actually quite well. Now what's happened is the crossover is actually on the opposite side of the lot. The original house that they were looking to build doesn't fit, so they've come and seen us. We've got a design that's close to fitting, but it's still not quite. The customer's now back and forward, arguing with the developer, not happy about the situation because what was represented to them in the land office ended up being different to what was actually the reality of the situation. And now they're having to compromise a house design, and this is onto their second design to try and get something to work on that block. So getting that crossover location is really important. Again, it could be on a roundabout, so people are thinking the driveway's at the front. They find out later the driveway's at the back. These sort of things can be really testing. The other one might be because it's in a really good location within the estate, but it's in a regular lot. They want you to have a two-story on it, and you don't realise. So you go in, you buy the block, it's a bit cheaper, it's a regular shape, and then you're like, hold on, I didn't know it had to be two-story. No one actually told me. So we've seen all these situations over the time.
And that's
go and have a chat.
That's why, Darren, you need a consultant to look at this stuff, because it's
Absolutely.
not only that, it's side setback requirements and things like that. We had one during the week that had a side setback requirement. You could build on the boundary on one side and you have to have a meter on the other side, which is pretty common. Naturally, the garage is what's going to be built on the boundary, but they had a specific arrow pointing on the opposite side. whoever did the plans made a mistake. All the others have the arrow on the garage boundary allowable side, but this one block had the arrow on the opposite, and you can't overrule that. So in this case, the house will actually have to have the garage 1 metre off the boundary, plus the house will also be a metre off the boundary, or you would have to build the house component on the boundary as well. So this would be confusing for someone listening right now who has no idea about this stuff, which is why we're saying you need to, before you buy it, you need to get an idea of what house can fit on there.
Yeah. Or it could say, like you say, garage can be on the boundary, provided it's a side boundary, but you've got what's a back boundary where now the garage, on a corner with a crossover to the back, where the garage has to be a metre off.
Yeah.
And what a waste of a metre of space. No one's ever using that space. Maybe put some bins there or something, but it's such a crappy location. Yeah. But that's what the design guidelines say, or the building envelope. The case I was talking about, this pizza-shaped block during the week, we've convinced the developer that the second boundary is actually a side boundary. So this guy doesn't have a back boundary. So initially they were assessing it as a rear boundary that needed a 3 metre setback. Instead, a side boundary only needs a 1.2 metre setback. So the 3 sides, the front, it's got a normal front setback of 4 metres, and the 2 sides of which one could technically be a back, but it's really a side, I guess. And they were interpreting it as a back, needed 3. Now they're allowing it at 1.2. But again, that's impacting people around them, and it's created angst for that customer. So the more information you can get, I guess, with respect to setbacks, crossover locations, etc., is really, really important, because it'll help work out how the design itself is going to work. And what you don't want to do is get all the way to a building permit stage and then find that you're having to redesign the home to suit these requirements. And that does happen at times. So, don't be caught.
Yeah.
Cool. What's the last one, mate?
Yeah, I'd say just in addition to that, orientation and living area locations is huge.
Yeah.
That's why you've got to get the design up front. We see that on normal blocks all day, every day. People just buying a plan, putting it on a block. That's why crossover, which is where your driveway goes, Darren is mentioning the importance of that, is because that where your garage is then determines, okay, do I want my living areas on the garage side or on the opposite of that, based on where the northern point is for your block. Okay, so all those things need to be factored in by the experts. Mistake number 3, I think some of it meet a bit of disagreement, Daz, potentially. But I would say, because we do it, I suppose, I'm trying to be careful here. But basically, mistake number 3 for me is that when you buy an irregular shaped block, I believe you should get a site plan properly done to make sure that the design works. You don't have to do that. If you go to a volume builder and they've got one off the shelf and it clearly fits, that's cool. But if you've got one that is being redesigned and it's sort of like, red tape and white out and all, red pen and white out and all this stuff all over the joint, and you're not quite convinced, I would be getting a site plan done, a concept plan, we call it, just to make sure that it's drawn and you can see the dimensions, all that sort of stuff. I think some people will disagree because it's not a service they offer as a builder, but I'm just saying it's something we do offer, and many others do, for your own comfort. If you're really not too sure how that's going to fit, how it's going to look, how it's going to be shaped, then get something done. Pay $500, get a concept done, whatever it may cost, because that will be so much more comfortable and give you the confidence to push ahead with whichever builder that is. Yeah,
I think as a sales consultant who's sitting in a display home, and you're there selling this thing, is if you're not 100% sure, go and consult your office and see if they can do a quick sketch plan to help out, and again, similar to what you're saying, in the case of ourselves, we'll do that sketch plan, just to try and make sure we don't want to get caught later. Just too many headaches, and it's too much disappointment for the customer, and they're upset and angry and all sorts of stuff because the house doesn't fit anymore.
Yeah.
That's not a great journey for any customer. So we want to try and make sure that design fits and it works, and that again, it can be built, because again, not everything, just because you can draw it doesn't mean you can build it. So making sure it can be built, understanding that businesses, build policies and stuff, just to make sure that that's going to get the tick of approval. So last thing you want is to waste a few months of your time and then find out, sorry, we're not going to build it.
Yeah. It's pretty common too. So when you have, we call it a Tetris house on a pizza-shaped block, and you've got this jagged house all the way along that boundary, you really want to make sure you know what those dimensions are going to be of each of those
Yeah,
rooms and that they're going to flow, because quite
for
often
sure.
it doesn't end up the way you thought based on the consultant's initial rough sketch. They're doing their best, but get something done properly.
Yeah, absolutely, mate.
Be my advice. Yeah.
No, great. Well, I guess to wrap that up, Cole, what I would love to say is irregular blocks are actually bloody good buys, and they're worth having a look at if you can make the house work. So, if all those things are ticks, well, then don't be scared to buy an irregular block, and don't let someone else talk you out of it. You might end up with 200 square meters more backyard. You can do a lot with that, like for the same money. And again, when you go to sell it later, you've got a block that's 200 square meters bigger than the one next door that's selling for the same money. Like, hold on, that just makes a whole lot of sense. So,
Yeah. Yeah, it can add a bit of value there in the price. It can, because they
absolutely.
don't care down the track. They're like,
No,
oh,
the
that's
value
that's
doesn't
a bigger
care.
block. Yeah.
People come along, you've landscaped it beautifully, you put a pool in the backyard that your neighbour didn't have room to. Hold on, you got a much better value home.
Yeah. Cool. Well, hopefully that was helpful, folks. Thank you very much for listening. And as always, if you've got some feedback, let us know. Just jump on there, homebuildinghub.com.au, feedback, questions, topic ideas, and please leave us a 5-star review on the platform you're on. That'd be very, very helpful. Other than that, Daz, we might leave it there and see you guys on the next one.
Catch you on the next one. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Home Building Hub. As part of the podcast, we have to be a little careful to cover ourselves on a legal standpoint. So we do have a disclaimer. Whilst we're all about providing value to you, this podcast should not be considered legal or financial advice. It does contain general information only, and you should seek out independent professional advice on your own personal situation before you make any legal or financial decisions.
1,